Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a very simple alcohol ink background and combine it with some products from Waffle Flower's June release. Here are the Waffle Flower products we're going to use today. First up is the brand new Little Painters combo. It comes with the Little Painters stamp set as well as the Little Painters matching die. I'll also be using a sentiment from the Rainbows stamp set. I'm going to use the one that says, "You color my world." I'll use the sentiments die to create my sentiment strip, and I'll create a stitched border using the A2 Nesting Rectangles 1 die. We're just going to dive right into it and start with our alcohol ink background. I have some Yupo paper. This is a pack by Ranger. And I also have some Ranger alcohol inks that I'm going to use here. You want to make sure you use something like Yupo paper with your alcohol inks because it allows the inks to move and spread more freely. I've grabbed a sheet from the pack. The sheets are 5 by 7, so they're larger than your A2 panels. The nice thing about this larger size is it allows me to select the best area from my background to die cut my A2 panel from. So I'm starting to get some ink onto the Yupo paper. I'm actually not even squeezing this ink bottle. I'm just kind of turning it over and the ink just kind of flows out. So you want to be careful of that. Don't squeeze. There's no need to. The ink kind of just comes right out there. Sometimes I'll hold the bottle about 6 inches away from the paper to get like larger circles of ink, and then sometimes I'll tap the tip of the ink bottle right to the Yupo paper, and that gives me a little bit smaller ink circle. So that's a little bit how I'm controlling the look of this background. But with that being said, you do not have a lot of control over alcohol inks. That's kind of the beauty and wonderfulness of this process. It's very organic, and you get to kind of get surprised by your results. So I just went to my third color here. So far I've used Citrus, Stream, which is that kind of teal color. The pink is Wild Plum. Now I'm moving on to a blue. This is Sailboat Blue, and then I'll bring in one more color here. I am kind of moving that ink a little bit for that Sailboat Blue to kind of fill in some of those white spaces. I will end up leaving a couple white spaces when I'm done, but that's okay. I don't mind them. And now I'm doing my final color, which is Watermelon, and I'm being very careful with the watermelon because this one is the one shade that doesn't mix too well with the others. I am mindful of my colors here. I don't want to create mud. And that will complete my alcohol ink background. I'll set it aside so it can dry for a little bit. While my background is drying, I'm going to work on my images for my card. I've gone ahead and stamped several images from the Little Painter stamp set onto some white cardstock. I stamped the images in Memento Tuxedo Black, which is a alcohol marker friendly ink, and I'm using my Copics here to color these in. I do have my colors on screen here so you can follow along. I start with the handles. I'm painting 3 of the handles on these paintbrushes, kind of a black handle look, and I do struggle here with the gradation a little bit, so I do kind of go back and forth with my colors. But I start with my black, which is 100, and then I move on to my medium, which is C7, and then I use C5 for my lightest gray. I also will bring in some 0, which you'll see in just a little bit here, to kind of lighten everything up. Because I did struggle with the blend here. I think I just need a few more. I think maybe I should have started with C7 as a base and then did 100 on top of it. But you live and you learn. But I did manage to get a gradation on these, a nice gradation. So here's the 100 here, just kind of smoothing out that gradation a little bit so it's a little more seamless. And then now I'm going back over with my grays, which is C5 and 3/7, to kind of soften and get that roundness, to make it look like it has that roundness. Now moving on to the metal part of the brushes, and that I'm just using 2 grays for, C1, which is my light, and then C3, which is my dark. And then I'll paint the handle on this brush like wood, and I'm going to paint my palette to look like wood. I start with E00, and then I'm going to create the look of wood grain with E21. I'm just doing a flicking and swishing motion to get these thin lines over the surface of the panel. I'll even do some kind of U lines to create the look of wood knots. It's actually very simple to do, and it really created a great look. I'm going to continue to work my way around the palette, adding the wood grain lines and wood knots to really make it have that completed wood grain look. And for the brush, I'm just going to add the darker shade along the side to create the gradation. I'm using Beachy 10 for the bristles on the black handled brushes and 2 browns, E37 and E29, to complete that watercolor brush. And I just missed this little part here on this watercolor brush. I'm using the same grays that I used before on the metal parts of the black handled brush, which is C1 and C3. And just adding a little bit of darker gray to, again, create that roundness. And that will complete my Copic coloring. Now I'm going to move on to stamping my sentiment. I've already die cut a sentiment strip using the sentiments die from some black cardstock. I've kept the panel that I die cut the sentiment strip from and mounted it into my MISTI, and inside that negative space I'm centering a sentiment from the rainbow stamp set. Then I'll fold my MISTI over and pick it up. This is how I like to stamp my sentiment strips. I think it's just easier. For some reason I have a hard time cutting a nice thin perfectly straight strip, so I really love the sentiments die. It just saves me a whole lot of trouble. So I'm now going to ink up my sentiment with Versamark ink. I've already applied some anti-static powder down onto my sentiment strip, which I did pop inside that negative space there, and I'll just stamp it down. I will stamp this twice. I find that this is the best way to get some really nice heat embossing. You really get really good coverage when you stamp your stamps twice in the Versamark ink. So I'm inking it up in Versamark again and stamping it one more time. And as you can see in the top part of my MISTI, I did die cut all the paintbrushes and the palette already. I just forgot to mention it earlier. With my stamping done, I'm ready to put on the embossing powder. I'm just doing some white embossing powder, going to tap off the excess, and then I will heat set this with my heat gun. Once I finish heat setting this, I'm done with my sentiment. I'm now ready to move on to completing my background. So I have my alcohol ink background here. It's all dry and ready for me to die cut. I have the largest die here from the A2 Nesting Rectangle 1 die set. I'm going to grab my plates here, place the background down, and then use the open space of the die to kind of decide where the nicest section of this panel is, and that's where I'm going to die cut for my card. And then I'll just run this through my die cutting machine. I could have just trimmed this down as well, but this die adds a beautiful stitched border, and I just really like that additional detail on my panel. I'll just remove the panel from the die and then set that aside. I'm now ready to assemble my card. I have an A2 top folding card base here made from 110-pound white cardstock. I'm just going to run some tape along the top of it here and then stick my alcohol ink panel directly down. It does look like my card base is a tad larger than my panel, so I'm going to snip off the excess with a pair of scissors. The trick to this is just make sure the blades are underneath your front panel. So now that it's cut, I'm going to now stick my images down onto my card front. I've got some foam tape here. I'm going to add foam tape to the back of all my images, including the sentiment strip as well. The only thing you want to make sure is that you leave a majority of the wooden palette free, because you're going to cover up the ends of the paintbrushes with some of the palette, and you don't want the foam tape to get in the way. Now I'm just removing the backing and starting to stick these brushes down. I've already jumped ahead and added foam tape to the back of everything, and once I get the position of the brushes the way I like, I'll stick them down, and then I'll finish up with the palette, remove the backing, and then stick it right over the ends of the brushes to hide those ends. I also have foam tape on the back of my sentiment. I doubled up some foam tape here, and I'm going to snip it down a little bit. I know that I'm going to have overhang of my sentiment, so I'm going to put this doubled up foam tape at the end right behind the world part of the sentiment. That way the whole sentiment strip is supported by foam tape. And then I will peel the backings off and stick it down onto the palette. And that will complete my card. I'll hold it up to the camera here so you can see that beautiful alcohol ink background. This is a very simple alcohol ink background to do. In fact, this is one of the firsts I've ever done. Now I thought I would share with you guys because I'm sure you can replicate this at home. I'll get braver in the future and try some cooler techniques, and I'll share them with you. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching.